Thank you. Τι να κάνω, δεν με ακούνε, με βλέπουν μόνο. Ναι. Dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen from Cyprus and abroad, good evening. After the summer break, we are back with the interesting Monday evening lectures that deal with various aspects of the archaeology and history of the Eastern Mediterranean. This semester, we are going to have 11 lectures. This is the first one. And 3 conferences. One has already been held last week. I welcome you to the first hybrid lecture of the 62nd public lecture series of the Archaeological Research Unit. Tonight, we have the great honor and pleasure to welcome in the lecture hall of the ARU, Professor Dr. Albrecht, Islam scientist, who is director of the Center for Near and Middle East Studies of the Philipps-Universität, Marburg. Professor Fuchs has studied history and Islamic studies at the universities of Cologne and Cairo. His research has started with an MA thesis titled The German Community in Egypt Between the Two World Wars. Thanks to a scholarship of the Studienstiftung des Deutschen Volkes, he could undertake research for his PhD thesis at the Orient Institute Beirut and the School of Oriental and African Studies about the Syro-Palestinian coast during the Mamluk period, 1250 to 1517, published 2001 by Brill. Just after that, he worked for short as freelancer in the foreign editorial office of ZDF TV channel in Mainz, until he started his long and very successful academic career in 2002 as lecturer in the chair for Islamic at the University of Erfurt. In 2007 to 2009, he became Le Studium Fellow in the Scientific College of Region Centre at Équipe Monde Arabe et Méditerranée of the University of Tours in France, and conducted a research project on the comparison of the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mamluk systems in the 16th century. Since 2010, he is professor for Islamic studies at the University of Marburg. His research focuses on the history of the Middle East, 13th to 17th centuries, cultural and social history of the Mamluks, Islam in Europe, and contemporary Islamic youth cultures, Jugendkulturen. I don't know if I have translated it correctly. He is the author or co-editor of 7 books, author of 70 articles in prestigious peer-reviewed journals and thematic volumes, numerous entries in encyclopedias, and book reviews. He has organized or co-organized 44 conferences or panels in big venues in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Bosnia, Albania, Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, and the United States, and has also held many guest lectures in European and North African countries and the West Asiatic countries as well. He is acting in editorial boards of periodicals and book series in Egypt, Germany, and also France. Professor Fuchs is a passionate researcher, as shown by the long list of research projects funded by the DFK and the European Union. Let me mention just a few of them. The clash of Muslim empires, Ottomans, Safavids, and Mamluks in the 16th century, music and Islam in France, Trans-Ottomanica, very nice title, Eastern European Ottoman Persian mobility dynamics, mediating Islam in the digital age, and a most recent one, EGI landscape project exploring Egypt's landscapes during the 13th to 18th centuries. Last but not least, I mentioned the DEA DataZis project dealing with material culture in the Eastern Mediterranean between excavation and digitization, a project initiated in 2023 by Philipps-Universität Marburg with partners the universities of Ain Shams Cairo, University of Alexandria, and the American University of Beirut for encouraging interdisciplinary cooperations in research and teaching in the Eastern Mediterranean. We are grateful to Professor Fous and his partners for including the University of Cyprus, particularly the Archaeological Research Unit, to this important and much promising network. The second workshop of which has taken place last week in this building. In tonight's lecture, our esteemed guest will speak about guns and giraffes, looking at processes of material transfer between the Mamluk Sultanate and Europe. Dear Albrecht, herzlich willkommen. Many thanks for accepting our invitation to give the lecture in the Aru, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm humbled by your introduction. Thank you really, and also thank you for hosting us and our workshop last week. But I think it was really a good thing that we turned the occasion that we could not go into Lebanon into something positive for the whole group, and we explored Cyprus. And we had really a good time here in Cyprus scientifically. I think also for the Lebanese colleague, it was a good way to come out a bit of their daily troubles. And I just want to add maybe one information, because without also being too sure of myself, but I have published like 2 articles on the relations between the Mamluk Sultanate and Cyprus, which transformed me into a world-leading expert on this topic, because there was only one before, and now next year there will be. There was a small conference on this, so a more Mamlukists will come, because the relationship between Cyprus and the Mamluk Sultanate, of course, are very much to explore. But this is not what I'm talking about actually today. I will talk about guns and giraffes, and you will know what I mean by that, and the material transfer processes. And I choose to talk about material processes because you, as archaeologists, usually also deal with material culture. So what do we talk about? What is actually transferred? How does this material transfer differ from circulation of ideas or of peoples? All these processes include kinds of mobility from one point to the other. And within the transfer processes, materials and concepts might change. And thus, our concept, what knowledge about these processes is. And we all know that there has been some turns in historiographical thinking lately. In such an approach, knowledge is conceived as a social product and construct which adjusts to temporal, spatial, social embeddings and must be therefore constantly mediated, appropriated, translated, and negotiated. Such an expanded concept of knowledge encompasses ideas and techniques as well as everyday knowledge and superstition. Knowledge and social practice are directly independent in a broad history of knowledge. Of interest from this perspective are the production, reception, and spatial dissemination of knowledge in the Mamluk context. If knowledges in the plural can be regarded as culture, then the shift and expansion of interest in knowledge practices is interrelated with the change in understanding of culture. So also something which I'm talking about today can be perceived as culture. It is no longer just high culture or science and scholarly knowledge, but popular and everyday culture of all social groups, as well as military techniques transfer. So in order to investigate the transfer of technical know-how, a traveling concept approach is first confronted with the question of paradigms and narratives. What is transmitted? With the category of translation, the question of mediation comes into play. How is this knowledge transmitted? This involves both the individual scope of knowledge transmitters and the social practices of specialist networks. Subsequently, by asking about the circumstances of imitation and adaptation, why the scope of migration of knowledge concepts in historical and spatial contexts become important. What is decisive from a perspective of the Mamluk Sultanate and beyond is that the spatial configuration of knowledge networks or practices of knowledge develop across political borders. The Histoire Croisée emphasizes in this context aspects of interdependence and pluralization of perspectives above regional knowledge contexts. These pluralization of perspectives in knowledge and cultural production leads to wandering concepts or the circulation of material culture processes. Therefore, this especially applies to things in a scientific and technical environment, such as instruments, laboratory equipment, or preparations, which in other research traditions have also been defined as technical and epistemic things. The same holds true, as we will see, for the transfer of military technology or the presentation of Mamluk clothes in Italian art. As just said, knowledge travels within the same period, but as well in time. What we know from the Mamluk period today is based on historical documents, historiography of the time, but also very much on the surviving artifacts we still have from that period. It has therefore to do as well with what has been preserved, so what we can still examine it despite the more than 500 years since the Mamluk Empire is gone. And for such a process, whoops. Yeah. Okay. So this is also something which we are doing in the Tarsis project. Just in order to see here the material collection, sometimes there are special circumstances, like in the case of the 1,600 Egyptian manuscripts, which ended up in the small residential town of Gotha in Germany at the beginning of the 19th century, when they were bought by the German scholar Ulrich Jasper Seetzen and sent to Gotha in the aftermath of the devastating Napoleon expedition. Cairo was in turmoil, and many Egyptian libraries were plundered and Egyptian knowledge sold to Germany. The collection as such is now the result of a combination of German princely culture of the 18th and 19th century and the travels of European scholars, which were keen to discover the world and its mysteries, like Ulrich Jasper Seetzen. Of course, it is debatable if these travels were not preparing Western colonialism, and if it would not have been better that these manuscripts stay in Cairo. However, at this point in time, we have already 200 years of shared history between Egypt and Germany with this collection. And it is now German and Egyptian heritage combined. And as many of these manuscripts actually come from Mamluk period, this also is very helpful for me. And within the Tarsis project, also the material culture aspects, we have a team which looks at, from Egypt and Germany, looking at these manuscripts. But this is just some argument to show how material culture is changing, coming at special circumstances in different environments, and then also gaining another sort of agency in another point. The rest of my lecture will concentrate on two specific case studies, but this time from the Mamluk period. And the first one is the mobility of guns towards the Mamluk Sultanate. Around 1300, gunpowder, which had been invented in China, made its first appearance in Europe. During the first half of the 14th century, firearms were to follow. The Ottomans and Mamluks obtained their knowledge of firearms directly or indirectly from Central Europe. The success of firearms is very much surprising, as in the beginning they were not very effective and very difficult to handle and to transport. Use of cannons was limited to sieges. Their advantage compared to contemporary catapults was their curve of impact was flatter, all allowing them to be more dangerous to walls and fortresses. The firing speeds of guns in this period was not competitive at all. A professional archer could fire 6 arrows per minute, whereas a soldier with a gunshot at most once a minute. Moreover, guns were not as accurate as bows, and it was impossible to load a gun on the back of a horse. That is also for the late 15th, early 16th century. On the other hand, gun projectiles were able to penetrate metal compared to arrows, and it only took some weeks of training compared to the years the archers had to train. So this was the situation at the beginning of the 16th century. And we know in the Middle East, the first army actually using guns on the big level were the Ottoman army. And here we have the on the left side, the famous Janissary, the new corps. The Janissaries were initially recruited from among prisoners of wars, but in the 15th century they were selected through a so-called devshirme system, boy conscription, whereas households in the Ottoman Empire had to hand over their boys. The numbers of the Janissary rose considerably. At the beginning, they were also with lances and bows, but then increasingly in the 15th century, they became, they had these guns. And then we have a peculiar arrangement also at the beginning. So you have the, on the flanks, you have the Janissaries, and in the middle, you would have the riders, the so-called Sipahi, military units. One of the main problems, of course, with these early guns was that when you fired them, you needed several minutes for reloading. And in that period, it is very difficult to protect these people with the guns. So from the European context, you know, they use the so-called the people with pikes, the soldiers with pikes. So you have the people having the pikes, and they go down. Then the gunfire starts, and when the gunfire, when they have finished the first range, the people with the pikes go and defend against the coming cavalry. That is the main use doing that. And in the Ottoman context, they came up with another concept, the so-called Wagenburg. The Wagenburg, the chain of wagons, came initially, the Ottomans found this the first time by the when fighting the Hungarian army. These Wagenburgs consisted of several chariots chained together in order to form a mobile fortress. Cannons were placed on the top of the chariots. Large unit of Janissaries with guns stood behind the chariot fortresses so they could fire while being protected. These Wagenburg tactics were especially suited to the hilly and mountainous terrain of Eastern and Southeastern Europe. So what you would see is that the Janissaries actually hide behind these large constructions. The Wagenburg had been originally invented by the Czech Hussites under their legendary commander Jan Žižka in the 1420s during the rebellion against Sigismund, German Emperor and King of Hungary. The Hungarians under John Hunyadi were very soon recognized the advantages of this arrangement for protecting mobile artillery and infantry units on the battlefield. And so the Wagenburg protection for soldiers using the first generation of guns and cannons as they had to be defended from enemy cavalry and archers attacks due to the slow speed of the firearms. So the Hungarians took this technique from these Hussites the Ottomans, when they encountered the first time this technique and almost lost the battle, at the second battle in Kosovo in 1448, Sultan Murad had the Ottomans construct the same technique. So they spied, they got it, and so they arranged now their armies accordingly. And here we have an image where it is where you don't really see a whole Wagenburg, but you see the cannons and you see a chain between the cannons. And there you see the Janissaries behind this arrangement, and then there's the Sultan, and then here you have the cavalry. And what they are doing is but this is like just how the arrangement is. Of course, this was much bigger and stronger, but the classical tactic of the Ottoman army was that the cavalry on both sides were encircling the enemy and then pushing him towards the Wagenburg construction, where the enemy would be hurt by the guns and the cannons. So he would be erased by that. So it's the classical encircling, and then they have no chance and will be decimated by this heavy artillery. The one thing is this whole modernization took place mainly on the Balkans. So in the 15th century. So when the Mamluk army actually, when they noticed this the first time, they were firstly surprised. They were trained for long years on the training grounds beneath the citadel in Cairo. The emphasis in their education was on the art of horse riding, the so-called Furusiya. And the Mamluks, we can, if you have questions, we can of course talk about later about the peculiar way they were recruited, because Mamluk soldiers were usually bought outside the Mamluk Sultanate in the Caucasus as boys 8, 9, and then brought to Cairo, where they were then trained in special military techniques. What made these young boys so attractive for the military system was that they apparently had already learned horse riding at a very young age in the steppes of the Caucasus and north of the Black Sea. So these cannons the Mamluks used, they also used some in sieges in the 14th century. And although the cannons were called Makahil al-Barud, existed in 3 types: cannons that threw Greek fire, cannons that shoot arrows capable of piercing stones, and cannons that shoot iron balls. After that day, cannons were a common sight in the Mamluk armies, but not guns so far. And the main fighting ground of the Ottomans, then the Safavids and the Mamluk Sultanate, was in the east here, was especially taking place here. So that brings it not so far from Cyprus, in Dhul Qadr. And this Dhul Qadr was paying tribute to the Mamluks until the late 15th century, when the Ottomans more and more claimed this regency for themselves. No signs of mobile guns or muskets can be traced in the Mamluk army until the Ottoman Mamluk War of 1485-91, when the Mamluks met for the first time large numbers of the Ottoman Janissary musketeers in military encounters, where they struggled with the Ottomans over Dhul Qadr. Apparently, it was the custom of Mamluk armies to cast cannons in ayas. Oops, here. No, here, sorry. In ayas, before embarking in military actions towards Adana, as Sayrafi states for a Mamluk military campaign in Cilicia in 1471. The fact that the Mamluks maintained a military production site in Ayas might also explain why the Ottomans were keen to expel the Mamluks from this region. However, upon hearing of Mamluk activity in 1485, Sultan Bayezid II ordered his son-in-law, the Damat Hership-Olu, to revitalize the Ottoman troops before Adana. He suffered a humiliating defeat in 1486 against the Mamluks, and the son-in-law was taken captive and brought to Cairo. Then he was released, and then they changed the tactics, because immediately now the Ottoman army put the navy into action. Because the navy then came here and made a successful naval blockade against the Mamluks, because the Mamluks usually came here from Aleppo with their large army, and they passed here during the Bagras Mountains, and here going up into the to Ayaz and centering there. The fleet bombarded the coast and decimated the Mamluk army, so their way to the north was blocked. However, according to contemporary sources, the Mamluks were miraculously saved by a heavy storm which wrought havoc on the Ottoman navy and cleared the way for the Mamluks. In the following battle, the Mamluks retained the upper hand and won a victory against the Ottoman foe. The outcome of the war was therefore indecisive. The Mamluks had won the major land battles, but the conflict remained unsolved. In the peace treaty of 1491, the Ottomans agreed to leave the area, but the Mamluks had to promise that their belongings in that region become religious foundations for Mecca and Medina, and their political influence diminished. An immediate result of the war was first that the Ottoman navy knew they could block the Mamluks going to the north. So the Mamluks more or less lost these territory after that. And the other thing was that we see much more the attempt of the Mamluks to install a handgun production. Yeah, these are very early images of such a handgun production. Ibn Iyas dates the first use of rifles, al-Bunduk al-Rasas, to 1490 during the Ottoman Mamluk conflict, when Sultan Qaitbay sent Awlad an-Nas and other soldiers equipped with guns to the front. Having shown their newly acquired skills to the Sultan in a public display, they were sent off to the north. Thereafter, guns are increasingly mentioned by Mamluk authors, and they were clearly modeled after the Janissary troops. The other thing is also what we see after 1490 is an emergence of mercenaries in the Mamluk troops. They were trying to buy especially Italian soldiers, fighting for them. And also in the sources, we have some Mamluk soldiers of Cypriot descent. One son-in-law of Sultan Inal was Cypriot. Some of them came through the annual tribute the island of Cyprus had to pay to the Mamluks, and descendants of the people who were enslaved in 1426 when the Mamluks had the big victory against Cyprus. So we see that these arts and these things are very much sought after in the Mamluk Empire. And we also see that in internal strifes after the death of Sultan Qaitbay, we have a Mamluk, an Italian cannon caster who is named here on the one hand, and we have a unit of black slaves, and this will become important also for the second part. We have a unit of black slaves in the Mamluk Empire. Now, why would we have a unit of black slaves? Is because black slaves are the cheapest on the market. To hold a gun is not very difficult, and it makes more sense to have black slaves using guns than these Central Asian riders, because the cavalry is so important. So the cavalry people are still on the horses, because, as I said before, at the beginning of the 16th century, you cannot use guns on horses. So you need the archers on the horses still, and you need now gunfighters, and you don't want to spend all your money on buying new white slaves to train, so you can also black slaves. But of course, in the anecdotes of the historiography, we hear a lot about problems because the old Mamluk soldiers are very disappointed. They don't want to have black slaves holding arms. You know, there's also, of course, a kind of racism here. But economically, it made a lot of sense. However, this process did not go undisputed, but we see guns and cannons made, especially in Damascus. And this is something which I'm looking forward to explore maybe in more detailed in the future. I think there is certainly a kind of gun factoring going on in Damascus, but I have not really located where. Because here we have one image of a Mamluk handgun, which is designated, and we see the inscription, Lil Amir Koid Bey al-Ahmar, and he's one who has this training of the Mamluk troops in Damascus. Now, the final Ottoman advance in 1514 to 1517 was first directed against the Safavids and their Shiite ruler Shah Ismail. But then the Ottoman army was capable of destroying this army at the Battle of Chaldiran, north of Lake Van. The Ottomans had superior numbers, more cannons, and were better trained with fighting with guns. What is interesting, and this is now the cultural transfer, is that the cavalry of the Safavids simply could not overcome the Ottoman Wagenburg, which they encountered there for the first time. Having understood this, the Safavids copied this Wagenburg and tried successfully to win this battle against them. What we are now seeing is also in 1516 at this battle, to make things a bit shorter, at this battle here in Marj-Dabik, the Ottoman army and the Mamluk clashes, and the Mamluks, they knew from the sources I know, they knew that they had this Wagenburg, but they still had the feeling that in the first war with them, the guns were the problem, not really the Wagenburg. That's why they manufactured a lot of guns. But when they encountered the Wagenburg in this big battle, it was so decisive that within a 6 months, they tried to get as many as these Wagenburgs constructed as possible. And they brought them here to Araidania in the last battle of the last Mamluk Sultan Tuman Bey against the Ottomans. So what we see by this model of guns, and especially with the Wagenburg, is that it started as a successful military context for guns in 1422 with the Hussites against the Hungarians, then the Hungarians against the Ottomans, and in red are always the armies using it. The Hungarians against the Ottomans against the Uzbeks, Safavids, then the Safavids against the Uzbeks, and even in 1528 we hear at the Battle of Panipat that the Moguls under Babur used the Ottoman Wagenburg, it's called like this, with specialists from the Ottoman Empire. So the point is you have here a material transfer, you have a knowledge transfer, and within 100 years, the Wagenburg goes from 1422 to the Mogul Empire, and also the Mamluks use it here in Raidania. And so there is a point, because one of the points in Mamluk historiography so far was until around 15 years ago, it was said the Mamluks have lost against the Ottomans because they don't use firearms. They are too chivalrous to using firearms. And then I was looking at the sources again and with other colleagues, but we said that it does not make any sense. There's nothing like a chivalrous army. An army will win. They are not chivalrous. Yeah. And why the Mamluks don't use it, the Mamluk soldiers themselves and officers, is because they're on the horse. And on the horse, you can't use these things. Not at the beginning of the 16th century. But in the army, you can use them. And they used them. They just had no chance against the Ottomans because the Ottomans were too strong and had a larger experience with these techniques. And the Mamluks had not a geographical advantage like the Safavids here. You can't see it here, but you have the Elbows and the Zagros mountains. So the Ottomans never really came over this physical barrier. They never really could conquer because the Safavids turned to a burnt earth policy. Yeah, but the Mamluks had no chance. And as well, we talked about this Ottoman army here. The Ottoman navy was very powerful. When Venice was in the last decades, and when it was at the head of Cyprus, was more or less allied with the Mamluks and in alliance. But in the early 16th century, they became weak, and so this also disappears. And so the Ottoman navy can finally completely control this. And furthermore, we have a big problem for the Mamluks. As you remember here, Vasco da Gama comes around South Africa. The Portuguese are showing up here. The Mamluks have to ask the Ottomans for help, and the whole thing goes out of control. But we see here that this infantry is there, and the technique wonders, and that military want to have it. So we have a transfer from Europe and a transfer from a specialist, especially Italian, a specialist, to the Mamluk army, but it doesn't help. This is the one case of the guns. Now coming to the giraffes, az-zarafa in Arabic. As is well known, there was this long-lasting relations between Italy and the Near East. On the emotional side, there was the other clear link between Venice and Alexandria, as the bones of St. Mark had been brought under legendary circumstances at the beginning of the 9th century from Alexandria to Venice. This theft had at the time contributed ideologically to the emancipation process of Venice from the Byzantine Empire, but it created undoubtedly a bond between Venice and Egypt, as can be visually seen on this painting from the mid-14th century. At a time when the end of the paper ban concerning the trade with the Mamluks reopened direct trade routes from Europe towards the Mamluk Sultanate. This ban had been issued and renewed several times after the final expulsion of the Crusaders by the Mamluks from the Holy Land in 1291, but now at the end of the 14th century, it has come to an end. With the trade, mutual exchanges revived and increased considerably, reaching a new high in the 15th century, when the trade between Italy and the Mamluk Empire became intense, and Mamluk clothing then left a distinct mark on Italian paintings. During the late Circassian period, the so-called Samt had witnessed a breakthrough in Mamluk fashion. Originally, it seems that it had been a headgear of lower classes. So this is here, and we have here a depiction by Arnold van Haaf in his pilgrim account when he went to Cairo. And we have here one in the Coptic Museum. You find it in Maya, Mamluk costumes, but even asking the Coptic Museum now, they don't know where it is. I'll still have to go around it. Also in the Islamic Museum, they say they have one, and maybe I can really have one at a certain point. What is interesting is that the Mamluks adopted it to wear this Samt for them because it was from the lower classes. The peasants wore it, And in 1436, the Mamluks forbade every peasant to wear this zamt, because it say this is now a distinct Mamluk cloth, and you're not allowed, you peasant, to wear this anymore. In 1464, we have a story that Mamluk soldiers rode through Cairo, beating up every peasant still wearing this zamt, and especially eunuchs and servants. Finally, it became such a common and distinctive marker for ordinary Mamluk soldiers that the Ottoman pursued everyone wearing this on his head when they conquered Cairo, rightly thinking that only members of the elite were allowed to wear that. So then it turned against them at a certain point. This visitor, the German visitor Arnold von Haaf, provides us with a good picture of the red zamt. Unfortunately, we have this surviving hat from the Coptic Museum in Cairo. Towards the end of the 15th century, and maybe already before, black slaves, from whom some of them would form a special rifle unit, as I have told, wore this zamt as well. This was not always liked by the Mamluk military elite, but black slaves wearing the zamt made apparently a huge impression on European artists. This combination of black and red was very much liked by them, which we will see. What is very well known is also the Mamluk embassy to Florence of 1487 for the gift of a giraffe to Lorenzo the Magnificent from the Mamluk Sultan Qaib Bey. The chronicler Luca Landucci recounted in his diaries how a great crowd gathered in the Piazza della Signora to see the Mamluk ambassador and his retinue processing through the city. The procession was made even more spectacular by the array of animals to be presented as gifts. In addition to the giraffe, there was a bay horse, long-eared goats, fat-tailed sheep, and a lion. The ambassador Muhammad ibn Mahfuz al-Maghribi, commonly referred to in Florentine documents as Malfota, remained in the city for several months. In addition to granting Florence the commercial privileges that it had long been seeking, he hoped to secure Lorenzo de' Medici's assistance as mediator in obtaining the captive Ottoman Prince Jem from the French King Charles VIII, as Prince Jem, the brother of Sultan Bayezid, was a rival for the Ottoman throne. So the Mamluks were into contact there, and we see how it really shaped the art production, because they actually, it was painted in almost the same year, and then you see also the depiction of Mamluks here and the giraffe, especially. Apparently, the embassy had as well black slaves wearing the zamt among them, as is shown on the image by Filippino Lippi, who worked mainly for the Medicis from the Strozzi Chapel in Florence. Another example of this is to be seen on the left side of the image of Vittore Carpaccio, St. George baptizing the pagans from 1507-1508. Vittore Carpaccio is thereby an Italian painter of the Venetian school who studied under Gentile Bellini. That means that Mamluk motifs were to be found in Venice as well. So here we have here you would have the blacks wearing the zamt, and here you see it even clearer in the big one. So this is a Mamluk black soldier in the early 16th century in Italian paintings. And so here in St. George baptizing the pagans, you see them here playing music, and we have all kinds of other headgears which are also Mamluk, which I can show you, or I could explain you in more detail when you would like that. And here one of the great things is also the healing of Anianus. And this is depicting the popular story about St. Mark heals miraculously Anianus, who would allegedly become the second patriarch of Alexandria after the martyrdom of St. Mark. And what is interesting here is that you have here the healing of Anianus in Alexandria. And so Alexandria, of course, shown as now as a Mamluk element. You have here a soldier wearing this black zam. And then you have these images on the church, which are very much styled like this opus sectile, from Mamluk mosques, because in Mamluk times it became extremely popular. And it's quite impressive how these kind of art then shows up within a number of years in Italian paintings. So there must be much more Italian painters in the Mamluk Empire than we know of right now, because that is one of the problems. But it is so realistically depicted that it is clearly Mamluk Egypt is the source of all these depictions. And here in the reception of the ambassadors, the depicting of the Samt here is very similar to another famous Italian painting from the beginning of the 16th century, which was painted by an anonymous painter, apparently belonging also to the Venetian school and from the Louvre. And here we have, what is interesting, we have the Samt, but we have also this arrangement. And this arrangement is the so-called Naura, which is it's a water wheel. That is the name. So the Sultan carries a water wheel. And I was some years ago quite intrigued, why on earth do they wear these things? So I start looking in the sources, and then I came up with a story. There wasn't even an explanation in the thing. So at the end of the 15th century, the head arrangement called Takhfifa, the light head, increased in popularity and size and became the big head, Takhfifa Kabira. No, it became the big, literally it's the big light turban. Yeah, so it started as, this always is something in Mamluk fashion, but in other fashions as well. The sultans wear something great, and then it has to be, the next one wears it greater and greater and greater, and then it becomes so big you can't wear it anymore. You do a reform, then it becomes slow again. You know, it's just like university reforms. So these kind of things. So they became very, very much big. And in around 1490s, the emirs even started to put horns in it to assemble Alexander the Great, the Dhu al-Karnain of the Quran. The largest version was called Naura, and it reached very impressive sizes. The Venetian ambassador Domenico Trevisan, and here we can see it, this is an image of Sultan Kanisu al-Ghuri with his two horns here. Who was received by Sultan Kanisu al-Ghuri, recalls that the Sultan was sitting on his richly decorated bench, wearing a great turban with two horns which were the length of half an arm. Because of this peculiar shape, it was named water wheel. According to the Meccan author of the 16th century, Qutb ad-Din al-Nahrawali, one's position in the Mamluk hierarchy was shown by the number of horns one was entitled to put into his turban. The Sultan had 6 horns, while the high-ranking emirs of 100 wore 4 horns, and the emirs of 10 were only permitted 2 horns in the turban. We possess of images of the Naura in European paintings and others. And the story also goes, why is it named Naura and Dhu al-Karnain? is that at a certain point we had a struggle between the Mamluk elite and younger Mamluks who should wear what, and the younger Mamluks started wearing a new kind of hat without very small hat. And the Mamluk pretenders, the old emirs, reacted in putting these horns and saying, we are entitled to power. And they said also, why? And then we said, Dhul Qarnayn came to me in a dream, and I had to wear this large horns. So this was actually a reaction of a concrete political struggle at the end of the 15th century. What we and so we can see it here as well. The Naura makes its way into European art here as well. Giovanni Manzuetti, the arrest of trial of St. Mark in 1499. The Naura was so peculiar it became popular in Venetian paintings. The governor of Alexandria wears the Naura. Here we mark again the link with St. Mark constitutes between Alexandria and Venice. But even more astonishing is Manzuetti's painting Nativity, where the Naura of the Mamluk Sultan can be found on the head of one of the three kings from the east looking for the newborn Christ. Yeah, so here the Mamluk Sultan becomes one of the three holy mages coming from the east looking after a child. The image of the reception with its elements here is also very interesting here. If we look at all, no, it's not like that. Yeah, because a lot of elements are very realistic. Also, not only the clothing and other details like the depicted rank, the Mamluk emblem. It's like an emblem. Each emir has and sultan has a specific emblem which marks his regency. And here you can see that there is an emblem also on this reception of the Louvre in Damascus, and it consists of a so-called bukja, a diamond, which is the sign of the Mamluk office of Jamdar, the rob bearer, a cup with horns, and another cup, the sign of the Saki, the Mamluk officer of cupbearer. And this is a very common combination at the end of the Mamluk Sultanate. This Mamluk rank combination was accordingly to Meineke used frequently between 38 and 53, the reign of Sultan Jakmak. During the time of Sultan Qaitbay, it stayed in frequent use as well. We might therefore assume that the still unidentified painter of the reception of ambassadors had visited Damascus in person. We know that the Italian painter Gentile Bellini had the opportunity to study Oriental cities during his trip to Constantinople in 1479, 1480. Decorative elements of Mamluk architecture and clothing suggest that the artist might also have reached Syria and maybe also Cairo, but this we don't know for sure. Two examples of the Jakmak Qaitbay uses of the rank by Giovanni Manzuetti hint to the fact that the Venetian school of paintings of the Bellinis had this personal knowledge or very detailed sketches at hand. So, because also here in another painting from Manzuetti, also again San Mark healing Agnano, you see the Sultan again, or the Mamluk governor, Alexandrian governor, and here the rank of Sultan Jakmak, which is used in the times of Qaitbay. And here again, San Marco baptizing Agnano, and again, the rank of the Mamluks seen here on the wall. Another very interesting painting in that respect is St. Mark by the brothers Bellinis. This painting combines two distinct moments in time, one ancient and one contemporary to Bellini's life, as well as three different places: Alexandria, Venice, and a mountainous landscape in the background. The clothes, however, put it completely in the Mamluk context as well, not only the women, but also the dress of the Mamluk women of the time. Remarkable is as well, to make it more Mamluk, is the giraffe is back again. On the right side, which alludes to the Mamluk embassy in Florence and makes here a reappearance in Venice. The Mamluk Sultanate did disappear around the painting of this monumental work, but still the figures presented here would for very long shape the image of the Oriental in Italy and Europe, very long even after the Mamluks had gone. These paintings were copied and other images could be traced. So to conclude, the two case studies are intertwined as they take place mainly in the same time, end of the 15th, early 16th century, and are also complexes of entangled history. If we come back to the initial deliberations about knowledge transfer and production, then we can conclude that apparently there were vital interests to make knowledge and cultural assets move from one place to another. If we ask what is transferred, then it is in one case military techniques from Europe to Egypt, and in the second, the image of the Mamluks as prototype of the Oriental from Egypt to Europe. The actors were army officers in one case and artists in the others. Why it was done is a bit more difficult to know. In the military case, quite obvious is that imported techniques were better suited for warfare and promised success on the battlefield. At least you could encounter better the tactics of your enemy. Military commanders of all periods tried to be victorious, and they adjusted to new ways and copied their enemies. The problem in the military context, however, is to get hold of enough resources, and here the Mamluks had a considerable disadvantage. Why did the Italians paint the Mamluks would be another question. However, these images were very popular and the people paid for them. So the Italian public and the church who paid for these scenes, and the St. Mark, of course, with Venice, but also in Florence, it was a trend, earned the living of the painter. So if somebody wanted an Oriental on his painting, then you painted an Oriental. And these Orientals looked apparently spectacular enough to be nice and popular. So in knowledge transfers, the economic situation always plays a role. Much more complicated is how the knowledge was actually transferred, most probably through encounters of the battlefield and foreign military Italian experts, mainly Italians, some Cypriots in the one case. In the other case, some painters visited apparently the Mamluk Sultanate, but we do not really know enough about their travels and made these sketches. What we know is that knowledge and cultural production is mobile and subject to changes in pre-modern societies. This comprises, like here, technical and cultural production. The Mamluk Empire was no exception to this. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, dear Purpose. Thank you very much. This was excellent, very fascinating and enjoyable presentation as well. You know, touching upon this very challenging and fascinating topic of that not just the transfer of the processes, but the actors and also the reasons, the motives behind it. So I'm sure, let's see our chat as well, if there are any. So please, if you have any questions for our speaker, this is the time. Yes.
Thank you very much. As Maria said, it's absolutely fascinating. I know very little about this period. I've seen most of these paintings before, but never noticed the giraffes or the murias. Two questions about canons. Can you tell us exactly, not exactly, approximately what a hand canon is? Yes. And also, you mentioned a cannon used for Greek fire.
Mhm.
Greek fire is always a big question mark. Do we know more about this?
Mhm. Yeah. Like the handguns are like early muskets, like very early muskets. So it is like using the same system just on a stick.
Okay.
So that you actually you have the stick, and then you do the fire, and it fires from the start. So this is what is called a handgun. So this is before you have the rifle gun. Before they would put the make a longer shaft, and this. So the early experimentations were done as handguns, so to speak. And then for the naphtha, in the sources, the Greek fire, I mean, the Mamluks explain it like the classical thing, so that they had taken it from the Byzantines and they're using the same kind of oil, oily thing. But I'm not really sure if this is true, because we have not really identified from the Mamluk sources. They say we use something which is called naphtha, and it goes back to the Byzantines. But from there, I don't know what the actual composition was, because we have several treaties like Ibn Mankali and others, and we know that they actually use old Byzantine sources and then copy what the Byzantines write. But that does not mean that they really did it. So that is we have it about terminology. What the Mamluks called naphtha in the 15th century might not be automatically what the Byzantines called naphtha in the 5th or 6th century. So I'm not really sure. It's something on oil, and they use that, but they don't use it very often. Yeah, because they are not so much in naval encounters, and that's where this naphtha becomes most important, of course.